All right. What's good, y'all? Hope everybody is well. I know this one was a little more impromptu than usual. What's up, Malika? What's up, Michael? Hope everybody's doing good. Welcome to the Onyx Report, right? Where we as Black male justice advocates use critical analysis to uplift Black men and boys. Get my stuff here. Hopefully that's a little bit better. Almost didn't go tonight. Just feeling not feeling the greatest today, so might be a little shorter. But just something I wanted to kind of drop, and then maybe get some commentary from some of you on some of the things rolling around in my head. So we'll see how that goes. But tonight we are broadcasting on, of course, YouTube and Twitch, LinkedIn, and of course, innerlightradio.com. So make sure you support innerlightradio.com if you have not before. Please do so. Check it out. Let's see. What's up? I'm listening. Taylor, what's going on? It's one of those weeks, a little draining. Got a lot going on. Nothing entirely negative, just draining, Much appreciated, brother Malika. Yeah, I need an energy injection. I've been grinding pretty hard lately. So it is what it is. Electrician 480, what's up? Hope you're well. All right. So first and foremost, y'all know I like to honor my subscribers. So let me go ahead and do that real quick. All right. So again, thanks to my subscribers. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will. You can go ahead and become a member on YouTube right next to the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell so you're notified when I go live. And I've been doing that a lot more lately, a lot of impromptu lives. So you definitely want to hit the bell, notification bell, so you can be made aware. But yeah, support the channel if you will. And you can also go to Patreon, and you can support the Onyx Report monthly through there, or you can support the Institute for Black Male Studies through there as well. So, help us out. Let's keep it going. Yeah. All right. So we got a number of people coming through. What's up, Derek? Mark, what's going on? Hope everybody's well. Hybrid Ninjas, always good to see you. D-Hive, what's up? He said, finally got me alive, huh? Man, Ragnar, what's going on? Donnie, what's up? Gold Professor, good to see you, man. All right. Malika said, hope I'm re-energized by the new one. I'm scheduled. My son and I will be rolling tomorrow to go see it. So it is what it is. That's one of the things we get out, to do. But I think it's about time. I got to drive out to the coast. I need to take in a beach. So I might be doing that sometime this week. Take the top down on the convertible, go out and hit the beach, meditate. I like to watch the sundown. Y'all know how it is. I haven't done it in a while, so it might be about that time to get that in. And I always urge y'all to do the same. Whatever your ritual is for rediscovering your peace, I highly recommend we do it, because when I look at the data as far as stress, as far as high blood pressure, as far as all that jazz, Black males tend to find themselves at the top of those lists. So, we got to do what we got to do. Now, y'all know what it is today. I'm dealing with something I'm calling the current redefinition of blackness, and I'm suggesting that it's gendered, right? And I'm calling this the impact of priority female ascendant policy. Now, what does that mean? Priority female ascendant policy. I've been talking about this for the last couple of years, the ways in which private philanthropy, corporations, and even the state play a role in creating very different realities for Black men and women, right? Providing opportunities on one end for one demographic while providing a lack or dearth of opportunities for another. And what's the purpose, right? I can tell you back in the 60s and 70s, there was a moment in American history where Black America shamed the entirety of America, especially during the Cold War. And it was such an impactful block that had global implications when you looked at this small little Black community that found itself on the global stage, highlighting America's deeply hidden racist problem. And it wasn't for it wasn't but a couple of years before you hit the 70s, and then all of a sudden, each and every component of Black America was undermined from within. And they were lured with the idea of access. So whether you're talking about, Black women, whether you're talking about middle class, whether you're talking about the intellectual elite, whether you're talking about LGBT, every significant demographic was lured in some way with access, the idea of access. Apologize. Let me just get my little mic together. There we go. So yeah, this is one of the things we're noticing. And so what I've been, in my little humble corner of YouTube, trying to do this last couple of years is monitor and report on an aspect of the Black experience in relation to these institutions that gets shunned a lot in professional circles. It's downplayed. And that is the way in which gender and even sexuality has played against straight Black males in an interesting way. A way that we can actually see impacting us empirically, but we're not really allowed to call it out, right? Jason, appreciate that support. And I want to make sure that we have the information, the language, and the conceptual outlook to be able to do this with with a critical lens. This isn't about just going out and denigrating, whatever group is doing. That's not what it's about. What I'm primarily interested in is advocating for Black men and boys and really pointing out the ways in which we find ourselves on the receiving end of all kinds of treatment, and sometimes being ignored entirely, much of the time, in fact. But in order to kind of do this, I wanted to kind of, frame this discussion in a particular way. So tonight I'm going to report on a couple of new ways, or I should say a couple of policies we're seeing popping up that has been fairly consistent this last couple of years in terms of targeting one group for what I call social ascendancy, right? Priority female social ascendancy, right? And the complete ignoring of Black men, right? I tripped up on this really kind of matter of factly. I mean, for me, the beginning of the pandemic was the point where I really started to see this in the moment. I mean, prior to that, you guys know I've been talking about this stuff over the last few decades. But when I started to look at it during the pandemic, I started to identify the various grants and organizations and funding opportunities, be they for individuals or for nonprofits, that were specifically targeted to women and girls only, which I found extremely interesting, especially when the data on the given issue, whether it had to do with, children and disciplinary issues, expulsion, whether it had to do with homelessness, whether it had to do, whatever capacity we found it in, Black males' numbers would be worse and nobody would say a word. And the funding opportunities that would come about would target everyone but Black males. And even though some of the most massive protests of the last number of years have been about the deaths of Black males caught on camera, those who would get the opportunity to speak on behalf of what was going on were rarely Black males. And even when they, especially when they weren't, they would often bait and switch the issue to something else. And when you start to see, now understand, policy is a product of activism. Policy is a product of activism in many respects, especially for Black America. And we haven't seen any significant policy for Black males. But all of those people who have been activists and pushing for the uplift of the Black community, especially at the death of Black men, none of that policy benefited Black men, but it did benefit others. And that's what I found extremely interesting. So those kind of things got my attention. I started to look at it more critically. Rashid and Yesha, I appreciate that support. Thank you. I started to look at it a little more critically, and I started to kind of wonder what was going on. And as I started to examine these policies, what I noticed was that it wasn't just the policies themselves. It was the policies sitting on top of particular types of access that were already, often for generations, more beneficial to non-Black men, even within the Black community. So if you're talking about educational access, if you're talking about low levels of carceral sentencing, whether you're talking about employment, housing, income, media priority, class access, philanthropic advantages, these are each areas that Black males are in in a great position of need for, but they're the last ones considered. And so I'm looking at this stuff and I'm like, all right, so this last few weeks, or really this last month, y'all know I've been trying to go hard in the paint because my goal has been to provide you guys with data. Now it's interesting. I've had some people tell me that they've been banned off other media platforms for sharing some of the information that I provided. And I'm providing, verifiable, information. I'm providing papers, CDC data, Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'm not making anything up. This isn't just the ideas I'm putting out there. They're getting banned for sharing academic papers. One brother reached out to me this morning, as a matter of fact, and was talking about how he got kicked off of Instagram for sharing a paper that I did a video on a while back. I found it interesting. This is what it is. 104 watching. Please like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel. You can hit me up on Patreon, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. Y'all know the deal. I don't want to spend too much time asking, but I do want to remind you that, brothers' channels need help. There's a reason why you see so many people catering to everyone else but Black men on channels like YouTube, or at least incorporating other groups into whatever their show is, because they're following the money. And I'm not necessarily interested in doing that with this show. My whole purpose is to use critical analysis to uplift Black men and boys. That also, to me, means providing information and insight when possible that may be of use to you. Gold Professor, appreciate that support. And I think it's something we need to do more of, but it's going to be harder to do if, people don't have support. So anyway, so I was just going to do a kind of brief overview of some of the things that we covered this last month. In case you haven't been able to keep up, I know I've been dropping videos in an impromptu fashion, so I get it. Let me see. So going back for the last month, let me see. I did a video called "The Other Side of Being Single" that highlighted how Black women are socialized to even perceive being single in relation to, having relationships with Black men. And even though economically they end up far worse more often than not, that's not discussed, right? So what we happen to see in the news are women that are doing well, women that are earning six figures, but that's such a low percentage of the population of Black women. But that's what the narrative is. Most people have no idea that Black men still out-earn Black women at every age level for those that are employed. It's only when you incorporate numbers as far as the incarcerated where you see Black men's numbers dip below Black women's. And the only reason that I'm pointing that out is because at the end of the day, Black men are not doing as poorly as people think. Thank you, Samuel. And yet we are. It all depends on which component of it we're looking at. Yesha, appreciate the membership. Good to have you. So let me see. Okay. All right. So I started talking about male relationship emotional labor about a month ago as a component of Black men's experience and men's experiences as a whole different area of what's expected of us that we don't often talk about. So this is something you can go back and check out if you're not familiar. I talked about paternity fraud and the degree to which Black men, according to Pew numbers, serve as stepfathers to the greatest degree out of all demographics of men. Right? Then you have, let me see, I talked about a new type of brotherhood, right? Where in that, we talked about how Black male unemployment actually costs America $45 million, and yet they don't care. So employment is still somewhat elusive to Black men. It was before the pandemic, still tends to be during it. Which of course drives up homelessness numbers, but we don't often talk about the homeless. And in that same broadcast, I talked about, I covered a paper, an academic piece that actually breaks down the ways in which straight Black men earn less than Black gay men in a very interesting way that kind of confirms Jim Sedanius's work, social dominance theory, in ways that I rarely hear talked about, but still comes down to the same basic components. Black male threat. But that Black male threat that intimidates people as far as hiring straight Black males is not as present. And this is even something communicated in the paper in terms of how Black gay men are interpreted. So that lack of threat means greater access. And with that, higher pay. Right? So we talked about that in there. Of course, we covered Dr. Tommy Curry's paper when we examined how white feminists stole the civil rights movement. And he highlighted brilliantly in that piece, going back to the 19th century, how the anticipation of Black feminist talking points comes about from white feminism very early on. The denigration of Black males, the misandry, all of it, right? White feminists had actually outlined that narrative, and you almost see it word for word by the time you get to the rise of Black feminism in the 1970s and 80s. And he talked about, beneficiaries of affirmative action policy being white women. So we talked about that there. BGS and I did. Let me see. Another one we talked about, we still don't know the truth. We highlighted the number of boys fished out of the Chattahoochee River when they were looking for Emmett Till. And how I had not ever heard anybody talk about that. Right? We talk about Emmett, but there were others. And that goes with the 4 little girls bombed in Birmingham. There were actually a couple of Black boys that were killed the very same day in the very same city that I've never heard discussed until about a year ago. And I discussed it, and it's actually one of my lowest rating videos because nobody wants to hear it. So that was an important one. If you're interested in that one's called "We Still Don't Know the Truth." Shout out to Dr. Stacy Patton. We talked about postpartum, which is another video that rates pretty low, but it's based on new data coming out that men suffer from postpartum to greater degrees than women, which I think is interesting. And the reason I did that video is because often when you hear of some of the most heinous crimes committed by mothers, the first excuse given is postpartum. How many of you have ever heard postpartum used to explain a new father's aberrant behavior, especially when something horrendous takes place? See, at the end of the day, men, especially Black men, don't get a pass. We don't get consideration. You know what I mean? If you hear about a mother who killed her family, the question is, well, what did somebody do to her? When you hear about a man who's killed his family, it's all kinds of blaming about him. There is no postpartum. And I'm not saying that these things need to be used to, dismiss people from accountability. I'm saying they need to be part of the consideration of what people go through. We're all human beings. But yet for some reason, there's no consideration for that humanity when men find themselves in situations like this. I'm talking about the perception from the public. So that video, we talked about some of the new data coming out about postpartum and new fathers. And I find it interesting how difficult a time people have grappling with that. I actually had women writing me in private. I appreciate that support, Dr. CD, too. Women writing me in private to say, how dare you talk about postpartum in men? You guys don't have babies. Apparently, according to the data, none of that matters. It's all about the social expectations on men and what kind of undue pressure that puts on them, even as new fathers. The social expectations are still to protect and provide, even though we live in a feminist era where everybody's supposed to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. The expectation, understand, even if you're a hobosexual sitting on the couch doing nothing and your wife is working, your girlfriend is working and taking care of you, that has nothing to do with the social expectation. See, the whole reason we have a term homosexual is because it's a slight, it's a diss to men that are doing nothing. We don't have such a term. Well, the closest term we have for that for women are housewives. mothers. I mean, and there's no negative stigma to that. But for men, there is, because there's a social expectation that men play a very specific role. And this is a role we've been hearing about for generations. It really hasn't changed much. Women's have. So this new report on postpartum was actually important in terms of revealing what men go through, even if it goes against what's expected of them. And yet, how many care, right? We talked about why Black males and females live different qualities of life. We looked at the reproductive and sexual kind of roles that have been in place in slavery, as far as how Black men and Black women are perceived by the quote unquote, by the white community, really. We talked about framing the media script on Black men. That was an interesting show with Hood Scholar. I hope you go back and look at, because it actually deals with the representation of Black men, right? We talked about Black child maltreatment and who kills Black children more. Interesting report that really does exonerate Black men from the stigma of somehow, and this is interesting because I haven't seen any reports suggesting that Black men kill their children more than any other group, but somehow Black men end up remaining the face of familial abuse, right? And yet and still, the data proved otherwise, right? We did a show called Who Challenges the Hatred of Black Men, learned that Black male suicide rates rose the fastest out of any other demographic, especially going through the pandemic, and that Black men died from COVID at the highest rates. And there's only like maybe two articles in the last couple of years that I've run across that even admitted it, let alone went into any degree of depth as to why and how, and most of them didn't. We talked about how policy enhances the gulf between Black men and women, especially in regard to intimate partner violence, right? And that basically in that study, we talked about who initiates violence to the greatest degree. And across race, it isn't men. It isn't men. Across race. Not just with Black men, but men in general. We don't initiate violence. Women often do. They use weapons. They start violence to far greater degrees in both circumstances. And yet that's not part of the general discussion about Black males. And I'm also telling this not only to my Inner Light Radio listeners, I'm also saying this to those on Apple iTunes who listen to my show. Only my long Wednesday lives, my longer shows actually make it to Apple iTunes. But if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll actually see some of the weekday shows that are a little bit shorter that cover information as well. So if you've not been keyed in to my other shows, this is an opportunity to check out what you've been missing. Right? And of course, the last video I did this week, I was going to do a couple more afterwards, but I decided to just kind of let it breathe because I really wanted people to check it out. It's called Black Men Are the Most Abused Group in Intimate Relationships. And one of the things it showed in a meta study is that Black men are actually on the receiving end of unidirectional violence from women to a greater degree than any other demographic across race and gender. Yes, y'all. Appreciate that support. All right, okay. So Kevin mentioned me in one of his videos. This is a recent one or an older one? Because he reached out to me this week, asking about the study I just got through mentioning as far as who was abused more. He was like, "You sure that's right? Is that true?" I sent him the paper. And he was like, "Wow." Most people don't know. And in terms of intimate partner violence, we've been saying in Black male studies for years now, the rates of violence are bidirectional. But what's interesting to note is that the Black community has the highest rates of bidirectional violence in terms of intimate partner violence. The Black community has the highest rates of bidirectional violence, meaning that violence is coming from men to women and women to men at equal numbers. We have more of that than any other group. But when you get beyond bidirectional violence to unidirectional violence, meaning violence coming from one gender to another in a relationship, there's overwhelmingly women to men. And when you talk about intimate partner homicide, you're talking about a difference of anywhere from 50 to 70 people per year, meaning you might get 250 women that are killed. You might get about 200, maybe 180, 180 men killed. But that's against a population of 43 million, excuse me. So when you start hearing about because this is the way feminists like to play with these numbers. Well, Black men are killing us left and right, and no, not really. As a sociologist friend of mine told me, and he was dead accurate because I actually looked it up. He said, you got a better chance of being struck by lightning than being killed by your intimate partner. Don't let these people on Twitter and Instagram fool you. No. Black women are not dying in mass left and right because black men are killing. No. You got a better chance of being struck by lightning than being killed by your intimate partner. That's real talk. It is what it is. So these are the kind of things, Uneducated Lane, appreciate that support. These are the kind of things that I'm trying to get out because I really want us to change the nature of how we dialogue about black issues. Right? But I wanted to kind of also cover that because that kind of information, those kind of differences in black male and female experiences sit on top of all the other areas I mentioned. You know, when I talked about class access, carceral sentencing, education, employment, income, housing, you know, philanthropic advantage, meaning that whether it's private philanthropic groups or individuals, when it comes to donating, as far as black causes, they don't tend to be black male centered causes. They tend to be black female. And what we've seen in the last 2 years from mom and pop business support, entrepreneurial support, all the way to educational opportunities, they've been overwhelmingly fixated on black girls and women and not black boys and men, even though the data shows as far as graduation rates, as far as expulsion rates, as far as punishment rates in K through 12, as far as even graduate school rates, black males are at the bottom. And there are no programs for them. None. And a lot of that has to do with, as I've said many a time, many of these organizations, the people in question that are pushing these policies within the organizations are highly educated black women that are solipsistically not looking at the black community. They're looking at themselves as a wholly separate entity. But here's the thing. It's not separate outwardly so, meaning you don't have black women saying we are not a part of the black community. That's not how they're speaking. That is how many of them are operating, though. This was why it was so crucial when we saw that Ice Cube interview with Vivica and the rest of them. I forget the name of the show, right? But you guys know what it is because we saw this during the presidential bid leading up to it when Ice Cube was MLR. Appreciate that support, man. Thank you. Where Ice Cube was trying to point out the need for a new black agenda. And those women on that show articulated what I think has been happening organically with women for the last few decades. It's not necessarily been stated aloud that brazenly until that interview where he said, y'all are black people, right? And they were like, well, no, we need to do something specifically for black women. Nobody asked where the evidence was that was necessary, especially to a greater degree than black males. And see, Cube didn't advocate for black men over black women. He didn't. He said we need a black agenda. Those black women actually were the ones to call for a gendered focus. But the problem with a gendered focus is you have to be completely oblivious to black male circumstances to rationalize a gender focus that privileges women and ignores men, especially when men, and some of the greatest issues, the most concerning issues we have, tend to suffer to a greater degree. And there's so many areas we can talk about this. I mean, I'm teaching my black male class this semester, and I literally just can't get it all in. Every class, I'm keeping them a couple of minutes over, dropping stats, dropping statistics, dropping information, because I know that after my class, unless they seek it out, they're not going to get any of this anywhere else. They're not. Oh, you'll have generic discussions about black men going to jail, maybe black men being shot by a cop, but even those tend to really, the only time we really hear about that these days is when somebody gets killed on camera. And that still tends to be black men. People somehow want to talk about this like America just has some great deep this is what I call or what I should say Gigi calls Green Gorilla here on YouTube. If you don't know, check his channel, support him. Also support Dr. Ronald Neal. But Green Gorilla talks about necro envy, right? And this idea that somehow, America is just so in love with black men that when black men killed, they pay, all their attention to black male death. That's not what happens. It's not what happens. What happens is black men die on camera. See, this shit look, when you go back to Rodney King, it's not to say that they didn't pay attention to black death prior to that, but let's look at it. Well, hell, we can go back before that. Let's go to Emmett Till. Do you actually think Emmett Till would have had the impact that he had if he wasn't on a magazine, in a magazine, Jet magazine in the 1950s, if Emmett was just another name with a closed casket funeral, do you think we would still have a memory of Emmett the way we do now? Do you think we would still have this much focus on Emmett? And by focus, understand, just a few weeks ago, they were still coming out saying that they weren't going to reinvestigate his case. The reason that that's an issue is because people have been fighting, especially the family, to have his case re-examined for decades. But if he wasn't on camera, he would have been another name. And I'll tell you, there's so many names that we haven't even bothered to look at because they weren't on camera. I've said this repeatedly. About 200 to 300 black men die at the hands of police every year, about 9 to 13 black women. The only reason we remember the few black men that did die is because of their relationship with media. Because outside of the 2 or 3 that may be caught on camera per year, all the rest of them that you haven't heard about, you didn't hear about because they didn't die on camera. That's why we don't talk about them. That's why that's why the necro envy lie that America just loves to, champion, unjustly killed black men is bullshit. It's not true. There's just no death porn to jack off to watch them die and get some kind of sick pleasure out of it, to rewind it and watch it over and over again. So those men's names don't get remembered. There is no say his name for the majority of black men killed every year, let alone the ones that die in the community. There's no memory of them. It's all about what happens on camera. So we go from Emmett Till to Rodney King. And Rodney represented a whole new era of video camera in color, right? And of course, that was pre-smartphone. So by the time you get to the smartphone, a whole different situation. Roderick, appreciate the Cash App support. Thank you. By the time you get to, the phone issue, it opens up a whole new era in black male death. Because here's the reality that feminists across race are really, I should say extremist feminists tend to be extremely preoccupied with. There's just not enough women that die on camera. This is really at the basis of necro envy. That's the problem. And you can't advocate for policy to the same degree without some kind of way of attracting attention to death. But if that attention is only attracted to media, then what else do you do? Well, what some figured out was they used black male deaths and bait and switch the situation to draw attention to other issues that for the most part don't even really have anything to do with the very black men who people are coming to find out more about. That's how they navigated it. If they couldn't actually find the deaths that they were looking for that advocate more for other demographics other than black men, straight black men at that, they found ways to use straight black male death to bait and switch the issue. And that's what's been going on. So even black men caught being killed on camera becomes useful to every group but black men. We stand and take it. We don't know how to talk about it. I can't tell you how many scholars reach out to me under the table to say how they wish they could talk about it, but they're, they got to worry about what may happen if they do. And I completely understand. But it is what it is. It's where we are. And it's frustrating. Because I watch black men going through this on so many different levels, and so much of it doesn't even matter to so many people. It amazes me. And these will be people with black sons, brothers, husbands, fathers, uncles, nephews, doesn't matter. Grandchildren, even grandson. It's amazing to me. So, sometimes I got to drive out to the beach and relax because I just don't want to be on YouTube cussing people out left and right, but it is what it is. So anyway, there's a couple other things though, ignoring all this information and really developing this new definition of blackness that tends to stand void of black men. And that is, first off, what it actually does over time. So what it does multi-generationally is it draws distance between Black men and women. Black males and females, I really should say, because it's not just men and women. It draws distance between us to a greater degree, right? When you talk about having limited social access in a wealthy society, where the Black community only has 2% of the wealth, what we don't talk about is the extent to which the majority of that wealth, and shout out to ADOS for putting the data out there, right? The majority of that wealth is in the hands of boomers who bought property and had pensions when pensions were readily available. They worked for the post office, they worked mostly government jobs. But here's the other twist to it that nobody wants to tell you. The husbands died. Big Mama inherited the house and the pension. The hands of that small percentage of wealth in the Black community tends to be in the hands of Black women. And that in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. Men die at an earlier, age than women across race. But it is a different thing when you actually have a rampant focus on making sure that the very idea of Black male leadership is damn near considered a sin. 7 Cupid, appreciate the support. Hakeem, first time on the channel, appreciate you coming up, and thanks for supporting. Egbert, appreciate the support. Let me see. Says many thanks to the doctors in the manosphere, Dr. Johnson, Green Gorilla, Ron McNeil, BGS, Sergeant Willie Pete, etc., for the info, data, conversation, and new perspectives given. Shout out to you and all of them. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Appreciate that. It kind of amazes me sometimes, how little support I see pushed to some of those brothers, and they deserve it. And I also say that because I talk to these brothers off air, of course. So I know what they've gone through. And that's their business. It's not my right to share, but I tell you, those brothers need all kind of support from the hell they've been through. Really. And I know how much work goes on behind the scenes for them to do what they're doing. And I do hope they get it. I hope we all get it, because we need it. And this information is necessary. Anyway. What was that? So, anyway, I was kind of talking about the way this kind of splits Black men and women in many ways, because really, again, using wealth as an example for that moment, what I was saying is the hands of wealth in the Black community tend to lie in Black women's hands. And what we find for Black men is we become married in the imagination to failure. Lesser employment opportunities. And this is going back generations. This is not limited to just contemporary issues. We're not talking about the young Black men that don't want to work and don't want to go to school, want to sit home and play Madden all day. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the linkage in the imagination, especially among Black women, of Black men to failure, social failure. And the thing is, the reason that this is so frustrating is that, one, most Black women don't acknowledge that they have access that Black men don't. Even if you look at Raj Chetty's work, and he's talking about upper class Black males and females, he says the data proves that Black males lose their status to a greater degree than any other demographic. Meaning that if you're going to talk about groups who are upper class and completely, drop out of the upper class standing, tends to be Black males to a greater degree, far greater than Black women, as a matter of fact. They don't acknowledge that there is a different relationship between Black men in the state and Black women in the state. And part of the reason for that is that we've relied on a notion of Blackness that is so communal that the only time we've learned to acknowledge gender is when there's a negative stigma on women and girls. That's the only way we've learned how to talk about gender. So by that logic, except for when girls are unduly in a difficult position, you talk about, I don't know, you talk about hypertension, something, issues that are highly pertinent to Black women. Outside of that, we look at ourselves as one kind of block, right? We're just Black. But by not applying gender and gender analyses to Black male life, Black men become the default of blackness. Black women become a special category of blackness. And by that logic, anything bad that happens to black men is part of what happens to black people. Anything bad that happens to black women happens to black women. I know it's a strange kind of logic. But what it ends up doing is promoting a lack of empathy for males, because we don't regard what black men and boys go through as anything distinct from any other group in the black community. They're just black issues. When black men are homeless to a great degree, or unemployed to a great degree, or find themselves without social access to a great degree, that's just a black experience. Omni America, appreciate that support. But when it actually comes to the specifics on gendered grounds, that's only applied to women, girls, and now in the last couple decades, LGBT. Because at the end of the day, straight black men have no problems. I mean, remember, I think on a subconscious level, we're still associated with the privileged group that Crenshaw pointed out in the late 1980s when she came up with intersectionality, suggesting that black males were privileged because of their gender. That mentality is still at play today. This idea that black males somehow enjoy a privilege simply because they share a gender category with white men. And even though this has really been debunked, especially in the work of Sedanius and current black male studies scholars, I don't think that's penetrated the black mainstream. And this continues to create problems and gulfs between black men and women. Because black men are experiencing something, but we've often not had the space to work this out, right? Most independent male spaces have been infiltrated, because they've been called inherently sexist. So they've had to be infiltrated by, pretty much everyone, right, to avoid the replication of sexism. Although women's spaces are still okay. LGBT spaces are still acceptable, but straight spaces for men, no, those have to be infiltrated. They need to be broken apart, because if you leave men to their own wits, all they're going to do is replicate the same kind of sexism. And, this is the rhetoric we hear, right? So with that logic, there's been an extreme diminishing of black male spaces. And this is one of the reasons that something like YouTube blew up the way it did in the last 10 to 15 years. Of black men talking to each other. Still public, anybody can access it, but it's one of those spaces because it's free, it's easily accessible. You can even get to it on a cheap smartphone, and you can get into dialogue with other men that you just couldn't quite do this 30 years ago. I mean, in the 80s and 90s, you couldn't have these conversations like this. I got men that I've never met before writing me from the other side of the world to tell me their experiences. You couldn't do that prior to this. So men are finally starting to compare notes. They're starting to have dialogue that isn't overseen and supervised by feminists. Oh, they'll come in and start shit. I mean, I get that a lot. They'll come in my comment section and, they won't. This is the funny part. They don't watch the video. They don't address anything I've stated. They definitely don't address anything I've cited. They just come in to say all of this is ridiculous. You guys are, this, you're that, you should ignore this stuff. That's really the only thing most of them come in to do. Every now and again, we'll definitely get black women that'll come in and say, you're right. And then they'll share something they've seen, something they've read, something they've experienced that adds to that. We'll have that. But those women tend to get dissed by black feminists in general, right? That's where you start getting these terms like pick me. So they get resistant about supporting, even when it comes to things that they know to be true. And to be truthful, the majority of those women that I've seen who come in that are supportive tend to have men in their lives who they love enough to look past the feminist rhetoric and actually talk about what's going on. Usually they're mothers of sons. And that's a hard one. If you've ever been a parent, if you've ever, been chaperone to a life, that you were there. And I don't mean to downplay those who adopt or anything like that. You can still love a child, even if they're not biologically your own. But I'm speaking as a parent to a biological child who I was there to watch him draw his first breath. When you witness that kind of thing and you are responsible for that life, you can't easily dismiss that. And so when I tend to see mothers of sons, usually 9 times out of 10, if there's a woman that I find that's supportive of what I'm saying, she has a son, at least one, even if he's not currently alive. That tends to be the avenue. I rarely meet women that either don't have children or have a bunch of girls that'll come in and say, yeah, what you guys are saying is real. I've seen it. It's not fair. It's whatever. No. Jason, appreciate that support. Jocelyn or Jason, I hope I pronounced your name properly. I apologize if I didn't. Well, this is where we are. The differences in our experiences have been instigated by institutions, philanthropic, governmental, state, local, federal, you name it. And this has been happening over generations. So in that respect, Black men have been made to be tied to failure in the social imagination, right? You're talking about among lower classes, you're talking about access to welfare that Black men don't have. As a matter of fact, families can't get unless he's absent. And even though those are no longer formal policies on the books, they're still practiced that way. So if you grow up in a household where daddy being present comes with difficulty, frustration, parents arguing over money, so on and so forth, what's your perception of Black males? If you're talking college level, well, that's often based on the K through 12 experience. And boys, Black boys in particular, aren't doing particularly well. We've talked about this repeatedly. I keep dropping it because I'm hoping to reach somebody who may not have heard it and needs to know. California alone, 75% of boys aren't literate. K through 12, Black boys in particular. That's what I should have said. 75% of Black boys aren't literate. That's real. Nationally, by the 8th grade, only 10% of Black boys are literate. 12% in terms of math and science. So are they going to college in high numbers? Not really. And it's even difficult to function in STEM fields if you can't read or do math. So even as we're watching the birth of a new labor dynamic, it's still one that tends to leave Black males on the outs because the very resources they need from K through 12 are not there. And I rarely see an uproar about it. But again, Black boys and men are associated with failure. Black women and girls have become acclimated to some degree of access. They're familiar with being able to go to an authority institution or authority figure to get a problem addressed. And they have a greater degree of access to do so and don't understand that Black males often don't. I told this story a couple of years ago as just an example. I remember at the time, this is probably now, this might be about 8 years ago. I remember I was late on my utility bill, my gas bill here at the house. And I tried to call in to negotiate a pay date or whatever. And the operator got on, no, sir, pay by 5 p.m. or it's cut off, So my lady at the time, she was like, well, why didn't you just ask him for more time? What you think? I got a doctorate and that never crossed my mind. I already did that. He said, no, that doesn't happen. And she said the same thing about, we had a feminist dean in our college that, just really hated my guts. And every time I asked for something, she'd turn me down or give me all kinds of grief. And she was like, no, she's so nice. I've never seen that. She'd never be rude. I said, word? All right. I had a phone meeting with that dean scheduled. I said, okay, I want you to get on the phone. I want you to mute your phone. I just want you to listen. And I got in. I said, hello. That dean proceeded to start yelling and cussing at me. I'm sitting there quiet. Her mouth is on the floor. I never. And you didn't even do anything. She was mad about something that had nothing to do with you. I was like, this is news to you? But here's the thing. It was news to her. Because that's not a form of treatment she got. So after that situation, when I mentioned the utility bill issue, she didn't believe it there either. So I said, okay, this time we're going to do something different. Instead of you listening to me, you talk to him. Tell him you live here. And ask for more time. Because mind you, I've done this with 3 operators. They've turned me down. So she called on my house, on behalf of my house. And she said, yeah, we just need a little more time. And it didn't matter if it was a female or a male operator on the phone. He said, oh, no problem. Yeah, we'll definitely have, and they gave more time. But see, if I hadn't actually exposed her to that call with the dean, her attitude would have been, see, you just didn't ask right. And here's the funny part. The last time I actually asked, I asked her to give me a script of what to say because she was so sure I just wasn't asking right. And that's the perspective a lot of them have about Black men. You guys just don't do it right. You don't know how to speak right. You don't know how to do it. We can do it better. No, it's not that you can do it better. It's that you have a different degree of access. There's no empathy for Black males. I've moved in Fresno twice. I've had to apply to over 50 different places, and I had a doctorate and a guaranteed job. Second time, I had tenure. It didn't matter. As soon as I came into a physical space with whoever I was trying to, whatever the management company I was trying to rent from, they took one look at me and all of a sudden my application got denied. I applied to over 100 places in 2 moves. Denied. Didn't matter what kind of qualifications I had, any of that. My female associates don't have that problem. I've seen them get 2-story condos with no credit check. I've seen them buy cars with no credit check. I've actually sat in on those deals and listened. And the whole time I got my poker face on, I'm going, God damn. Because I know when I got to buy a car, even when I got money, I got to come in with a lunch. Like I'm prepared to be in there debating all day. It's a fight. It is a freaking war when I come in to buy. If it has to do with financing, unless I'm paying cash out of pocket, it's a war. And I've sat in, gone with female associates, and I'm like, that's it? You mean we done? Okay, interesting. But see, those kind of dynamics just, get dismissed. So the idea is that we're not doing it right. That's what we're told. And much of the time, they don't realize it has nothing to do with doing it right. It often has to do with access. I'm not going into meetings with my pants sagging. I'm not going, all of those stereotypes about why Black men don't get support. No, Darius, appreciate that support. That's not what's happening. I'm going in lettered up and everything. It doesn't change the dynamic. It doesn't change the dynamic. The only reason I bought this house, the only reason I was able to was the guy needed to, get rid of it. I was renting from him. And the only reason that happened is I'd lived next to him for 5 years. We'd never spoken once. And I'm the only one with a Black landscaper in the neighborhood. So the landscaper, he drummed up business with some of the other houses, introduced me to the white guy that was living here. And as he was leaving, he was looking for someone to rent his house. He only rented it to me because I showed him the house 2 doors over that I lived in. And he looked at it, he said, okay, well, it looks like you keep it in good shape. He said, and in the 5 years I've lived here, I've never actually seen the police show up to your door. I didn't say shit. I had a son. I'm only single parent, so couldn't really afford to go off and say anything. So I had to sit there and shut up. He was like, all right. So he agreed to rent to me. A few years later, the only reason he sold this to me is he owned too much property. I never even heard of that. In terms of, debt to income, whatever. He owned too much property, so he needed to get rid of it. And he sold it to me, and that was good. Because otherwise, I don't know if I'd still own a home by now. But my point is, despite all my qualifications, none of that made a difference. And especially when my son got over, I think by the time he got to 3rd grade, if I brought him with me to a rental, agreement meeting or whatever, when he was under 3rd grade and my wife was still around, they would take one look at me and then they look at my wife. Then it was slightly different. But if I went in by myself or after she passed, it was an uphill battle. So these are kind of, but again, my whole point at this juncture is that Black males become associated with failure. They become associated with difficulty, especially within the Black family, because we don't have the same type of social access. And it's funny to me because I hear older women, boomers, talking about, well, we're so glad feminism came around because there was a time where, you couldn't even have a credit card as a woman. Your husband could, but you couldn't. And I'm like, we're black men. What are you talking about? Like as if black men had some great access to resources. Anyway, don't let me go on a tangent any more than I am. So it creates a distance between black men and women that has a lot to do with access or lack of access and what becomes associated. This is why the hatred of black men when Tina Knowles raised the issue of that documentary was so palpable. Because in many people's imagination, black males are associated with failure, lack, debauchery, criminality, all of these various things. And it really doesn't matter what the data shows. When you have people give you negative information from black folk, ask them where they get it from. What's your source? Watch the crickets. Listen for the crickets. Because they don't need a source, as far as they're concerned. To denigrate black males is an accepted tradition, even within the black community. And our boys are raised in households where they see this on a regular basis. I even had young black men take my black male courses, and they would talk to me after class about how they have a difficult time hearing what we talk about because what they've been raised to believe is that black males are so monstrous that to even advocate for them by having a class on them is damn near heresy. Unless the information is negative, you're not even supposed to talk about black males. I've dealt with young black males that had so much hatred for black males based on how they were raised and what they were told about black men. And when I started to share statistics on them or historical issues or whatever, they were blown away. They never heard it. Ghetto user, appreciate that support. Yeah. This is where we are with it. So when you associate black men with failure and black women with access, you can see where this misandry comes from, especially if it's something you've seen with your grandmother, your mother, yourself, your sisters, your aunts. This is why I talk about what I call the gynoprotestal family structure. Because in each instance, you're talking about a network of women who all run their own households and have tenuous relationships with men. Your aunt ain't got a man, your mother don't got a man, you don't got a man, your grandmother don't have a man, but usually that's because, Papa died. But men come and go. They're useful for sperm, maybe a little fun here and there, maybe some protection, or of course on the back end in family court, useful there. But that's the perception. And black men run into these networks of women, not only in their own families, but when they're out dating, whatever. I have brothers who reach out to me all the time. Doc, I see what you're talking about. I didn't understand what this gynoprotestal thing was, but I met this woman on, I forget whatever app. I don't even know the names of the apps at this point, but I met her on this app and, I was starting to get to know her and I realized, she lived down the street from her mother and, her sister had a house a couple miles away and aunt had a house a few miles over there and they're all working with each other and networking with each other and none of them have any men in their lives, but they do have sons, but all the sons are really just like somewhere between thugs and servants. And they pass their sons around as a resource, go fix this at his house or her house or, deliver this over here or, help her with her bills over there. They're useful idiots. That's kind of how it goes. But all of that comes out of seeing black males as a resource, but not necessarily one that you need to respect, just one that is owed to you because they exist. Almost like chess pieces. You're guaranteed a certain number of chess pieces at the beginning of the game, right? And black males grow up seeing this dynamic. Mind over matter, appreciate the support. They grow up seeing this dynamic and they think that's what I'm supposed to be. If that's all you see, that's all you see. You're supposed to be a resource for everyone else. Doesn't matter what they need, whether you have it or not. You're supposed to kill yourself getting it because that's what you were told your job was. And a bad black man was someone who wasn't doing his job. I've had older women even say, if he doesn't start paying your bills, and this is back in the 80s, if he doesn't start paying your bills within 2 weeks of meeting him, dump him, move on to the next. Word? Okay. That's what boys are raised to see. And of course, girls, because that's what they learn to expect from black males. Now, I'm not saying this applies to everybody. Nothing does. I think it applies a little too often. And it's really a matter of not wanting to admit it. But I want to read a quote that came from Dr. Tommy Curry. And this was from an interview he did back in 2015. And I posted it in a number of places because I was amazed that 7 years later, it was still extremely accurate in many respects. Right? He says, black men still the largest victims of poverty, unemployment, incarceration, and death in this country. We're outnumbered in the university by over 20,000 to our female counterparts. Black women get 60 to 70% of all degrees. This has been happening for over 60 years. Since 1954, black women have been getting more degrees than black men. Now, that doesn't mean that we should somehow malign black women because they're succeeding academically, but it means that it creates a demographic context. So if you have a lot of black women who are moving into the academy that's in the university, then certain types of theories are going to appeal to them. So that's why you have this kind of hegemonic force of black feminism. It has a sociological explanation. You outnumber black men. You've been trained this way from undergrad. You have a certain class advantage that black men don't have. So maybe black men are still first generation, especially if we're talking black men from the South. We're talking about first generation going to college. So there's going to be very different class biases, and these upper class women, by and large, are going to have lower class black men. All this means that all this means that these are ripe areas of study for us to understand gender and sex relations and sex roles in the black community better. But right now, all of that is shut down. Shout out to Dr. Curry. This was on the Dr. Vibe show, June 2nd, 2015. Durante, appreciate that support. Yeah. So he's actually talking about, when I posted this on YouTube, a lot of black men just got into this whole conversation about how it's so much better doing blue collar work. And it is, and it isn't. At the end of the day, because these issues are structural, there really is no escape from them. Individual men may be able to escape. Maybe they got a successful show on YouTube. Maybe they got a high level position, and that's great. But when we start talking about the aggregate, we start talking about the majority. No, there's no escaping this. The issues present themselves in ways that seem different in different contexts, but it's really the same idea. I talked about this with Force Windu before he committed suicide. Shout out to him. Peace be to him. Talked to his wife about it after he had taken his life. And she talked about the difficulty he had as an electrician. And I even had brothers over the last 6 months coming on my page talking about how much more difficult it is to secure contracts, so on and so forth on blue collar. So whether you're blue collar or white collar, as black men, you still run up against a similar wall. It just presents differently. But the wall itself, the fact that it exists, is the problem. And here, Dr. Curry is talking particularly about the college experience. And why is that important? It's not just a matter of white collar jobs. It's also a matter of politics. How many politicians especially from the black community, get into high level positions without a college degree? The academy is where the ideas are manufactured. It's having those in high level positions that take those ideas and transition them into policy. And if the majority of people that are getting degrees and are even going to school are women, then it stands to reason that the policies in the next 30 years, after that's the case, are going to start being targeted overwhelmingly to women. And that's what we're seeing now. The last 2 years, most especially, we've seen a rainfall of opportunities. I'm going to share two more with you in a moment that are earmarked only for women. Now, if you say something about this, you're a sexist and you're a misogynist. And people look at it as if it's an isolated incident. Well, it's just Goldman Sachs. That's all. Oh, really? What about this one and this one and this one and this one and this one? Well, you're a sexist. Okay. How many of these programs have you seen targeting black males who clearly need it? Crickets. So with the VP status held by Kamala Harris, the newly administered, newly appointed, so to speak, Supreme Court judge, we're having a Black History Month that is, of course, in celebration of Black womanhood as we transition into Women's History Month and see really a recast of February, but it is what it is. But part of these celebrations are not just happening out of nowhere. They're happening because we are seeing a class advantage that women are taking advantage of. And the funny part about it is they don't look at their men and say, congratulations, you're doing as well. What they say is, how come you can't do what I'm doing? You're weak, you're ineffective. Again, decades of association with failure. But as Michelle Alexander once said in a lecture, there was a time where we understood racism. There was a time where when Grandpa couldn't get a job for long stretches of time and had to take odd jobs on a regular basis, Grandma understood why. He wasn't lazy by any account. He wasn't unintelligent. He wasn't incapable. He just wasn't given an opportunity. So he scrambled his ass off to do what he could. But at the end of the day, both Grandma and Grandpa understood why. We're in a different era now. We're in an era of unprecedented access to one demographic and a massive bifurcated denial of another. And instead of looking at that as a structural matter, we look at it as an individual matter. Even Black men on YouTube. We punish each other for not succeeding by unrealistic standards on an individual level. If you are not a six-figure earning, you have failed in the imagination of many Black folk, men included. And I'm talking about Black men. Black women don't have to make six figures. They can make $30,000 a year. They're still queens. If you as a Black man make less than six figures, which is an amorphous amount in and of itself. I don't know what the fuck $100,000 to $999,999 has anything to do with anything. Six figures in 2022 is not the same as six figures in 1983. Whole different reality. Very appreciate that support. Kata, good to see you, brother. Broken Blade. What's up, Todd? Christopher? Yeah, six figures is a whole different reality, but that's still somehow this imaginary bar. But when you get down to it, only a small percentage of Black men are able to access that, and that's not an accident. That is a structural reality. And yet, we punish ourselves for not being able to do it. Only 8%, $100,000 even is more than 92% of all Americans. More than 92%. If you make $100,000 as a Black person, that's more than 96% of the Black community. 96%. The other 4% are from anyone making $101,000 all the way up to billionaire status. That's within that 4% range. And the overwhelming majority of those are low six figures. Right? Except for those boomer women that own property and have a pension from their husbands. That's it. That's it. But that's the standard we're measured against. And if you fail to meet that standard, appreciate that support, Jerome. Thank you. If you fail to meet that standard, you ain't shit. And I've told you guys this for years. When I ask this question in my classes, 17-year-old young men sitting in class are told by the very women sitting next to them who are 17 as well that they don't qualify to date those women until they make six figures. And they're first generation college students living in Fresno. 70% of Black males drop out of the Cal State University system within their first year, but they ain't shit if they don't make six figures. Word. I know cats with doctorates who've been teaching for decades that don't make six figures. But they're failures too, right? So what Dr. Curry is talking about is a structural matter and how this imposes itself on the reality of Black life, as it pertains to college access. Andrew, appreciate that support. Hold on. I'm going to share with you a couple of articles on where we are now with some of this. All right, so I'm going to share three with you. Let me go ahead and pull this out. You know, you see all of this stuff and you read all of this stuff on a daily basis and you just start to wonder if you're going crazy. Because it's amazing to me how many people who I know to be educated will act like none of this shit is happening. So you can find this on blackenterprise.com, dated March 1st, right? Yesterday. $2 million in small business grants awarded to more than 200 Black women-owned small businesses. Now, before you tell me that $2 million is nothing, which is funny, because I don't know if I've even met Black folks that have actually seen $200 million in cash, or 2 million, excuse me. Hell, $1 million. But we're quick to say what isn't that much money. But all right, so, you know, $2 million. You show me the program where you've seen $2 million extended to Black male entrepreneurs. Don't worry, I'll wait. Joshua, appreciate that generous support. Thank you. Extremely generous. Appreciate that. Show me the program. And then show me 7 others to match what we've been talking about. And that's just a generic number because it's actually been way more than 7. We've seen this again at the city level, state level, regional level, federal level. None of them have been targeted toward Black males. But let's continue, right? So let's go down. Let's read. Reimagine Main Street today announced 200 plus Black women-owned small businesses and entrepreneurs have won backing Black business cash grants ranging from $5,000 to $50,000. The grants, which will fuel the growth aspirations and boost the trajectory of these Black women-led small businesses, include $50,000 cash grants awarded to the top 3 pitch competition winners, $25,000 cash grants awarded to 4 pitch competition finalists, $10,000 cash grant awarded to 150 businesses that launched pre-COVID-19, and 5,000 cash grants awarded to 50 businesses that launched pre-COVID. The Backing Black Business Small Business Grant Program winners either launched during COVID pandemic or successfully navigated their businesses through the pandemic. They include women entrepreneurs competing in 10 industries: retail, beauty, health, and caregiving, maintenance and repair, transport and logistics, professional services, food and leisure, technology, education, and training, hailing from communities across the entire U.S. The announcement comes at the culmination of Black History Month and on the heels of 7 finalists receiving coaching and then competing in a pitch competition streamed online earlier this month. Participants who received the most votes during the voting period that followed the pitch competition received top cash grant awards. Right. Winner Ashley Redwood started Trap Cardio, her business in Richmond, Virginia, that offers dance fitness classes that mix strength training with cardio in 2018. In 2020, she started to offer free classes on YouTube as Americans were looking for a fitness outlet while quarantined during COVID. Trap Cardio's popularity rose quickly. You know how many brothers I know that do physical training, whether qualified or unqualified, whether certified or uncertified. You know, quite a few. These opportunities don't seem to present themselves as readily for them. My upbringing consisted of living in areas with food deserts with limited knowledge of nutrition and fitness, said Mrs. Redwood. And explaining why she started her business, it was hard to follow fitness enthusiasts who didn't come from the same background or relate to my weight struggles. Today, with 132,000 YouTube subscribers and thousands of Instagram followers, Redwood has opened a nutritional club serving protein shakes and supplements, sells merchandise worldwide, and hosts in-person classes in a 10,000 square foot studio. The Backing Black Business Grant will allow her to upgrade her recording and sound equipment, expand merchandising, and provide outreach to the community, including health screenings and fitness workshops. Armed with an industrial and systems engineering degree from Georgia Tech, winner Janelle Darden, started her own beauty brand, Moisture Love, to help women who have natural, highly textured, highly textured hair, have moisture that lasts for 3 or more days and reactivates with a steamy shower. That's what we calling it now. Highly textured hair. That's the term. That's what we're using. Is that the new term? Oh man, I'm sorry. That caught me off guard. I didn't know that's what the term was. All right. Anyway, y'all know what it is. Come on. Anyway, we work with a local business in Atlanta that I also own. Hello. We work with a local business in Atlanta that I also own, which manufactures all of our hair products, said Janelle. That company hires women and college students in the community to provide them a living, working wage to care for themselves and their families. The Backing Black Business $50,000 grant will be integral to funding marketing and social media advertising to continue growing Moisture Love. I gotta find the report. I gotta see where I put it. I didn't plan on talking about it tonight, but I talked about it in a show over a year ago with BGS, and we were talking about how it's actually been verified that Black men actually do have more entrepreneurial businesses than Black women. So the way it's been presented to us, Black women have more. That's not really what the case has been. They have been credited with starting the most at the fastest rate. Black men have actually had more entrepreneurial businesses, but they tend to be underfunded. We come from a community with no capital. And that's one of the biggest barriers to Black business survival. That's why they're doing these programs. And COVID, the pandemic, wiped a whole damn near generation full of businesses off the map. Because for the most part, our businesses start with no capital. None. So these kinds of programs become extremely important, even though $2 million is not a lot of money. But let your business get a $50,000 windfall. That is crucial to reinvesting back in the business and growing your product or whatever it is you're selling, right? It can be extremely crucial. It can be the line of difference between going out of business, staying afloat, and thriving if managed properly. But you're not going to provide any of these to Black male entrepreneurs? And the way I think they rationalize it, and that's only if you back them in a corner, because otherwise they're not going to say anything at all. They're just going to, ignore Black males. But the only way you rationalize it is by saying, well, men have enjoyed access and privilege for so long. Yeah. Which men? Who? Two things I've known about Black men since I was a child. They don't get breaks. Black men have been held accountable in every context I've ever heard of, which translates to they don't get breaks. So whatever rationale you want to provide for why Black men shouldn't get access to any of these new programs and resources is a logic that doesn't apply to Black men as a category, not the one guy you knew whose family had money. No, to Black men as a category. Okay? So they list 5 entrepreneurs to win top grant prizes. Black women entrepreneurs are vital contributors to our national and local economies, innovating products and services to meet customer demand and creating jobs, said Tammy Halevi, co-lead of Reimagine Main Street. By providing cash grants and other valuable support and resources, we can help these entrepreneurs and their businesses thrive and grow as we emerge from the economic effects of the pandemic. Now, notice, let me see something. I'm going to click on Tammy. Let me see what they show us. Interesting. What's a web portal? All right. So y'all tell me, what's the likelihood that Tammy is a Black woman? But even if she's not Black, right? The idea here that, or at least what I've been saying, is that whenever you see these kinds of programs, it tends to often be women, especially Black women, only advocating for other Black women, not even their own, not even the males in their families, only other Black women. As if Black male entrepreneurs aren't, contributing to local economies and innovating products and services. There was a business study done a couple of years ago that I talked about online, shared on my Facebook page. I got to find it. I didn't get rid of it. It's still there. It's just a couple of years ago. But it actually pointed out that Black male entrepreneurs who had businesses that were large enough to hire employees paid the most, diversified their employees to the greatest degree, and were doing better than other groups, including Black female-led businesses. Not in terms of how much money they started with, but in terms of how they allocated those resources and how much they paid their employees. And that same study was the one most of us have heard about, where it said 99% of Black women-owned businesses had one employee. But most people ignored how well Black males were actually doing in regard to working with supporting their own employees, despite having no more capital when they started their businesses than Black women. And by the way, this program, this is capital. This is the difference between operating a business in your home and being able to secure a facility to operate out of. This is the difference. Anyway, this grant program could change the trajectory of some 207 amazing businesses led by Black women entrepreneurs across the U.S. who are the largest segment of new and emerging businesses. See? New and emerging. These are often Black women leaving white-collar jobs and starting their own businesses. And that's great. I don't have a problem with that. I'm not arguing that that's a problem at all. In many ways, they're leaving environments that have been fairly racist and maybe even sexist to start their own businesses. They're being pushed out in some instances. Black men weren't even in the building much of the time to get pushed out, and there's no attention to none of that, right? But who's making this statement? This is coming from Renee Johnson. Sounds like a sister to me. Co-lead of Reimagine Main Street. So now we got two. We got Tammy and Renee. This is what I mean by solipsism. And and they'll be married, they'll have sons, completely oblivious. I've known women whose sons were sleeping in the damn park and they're out creating policies and programs for daughters. Sometimes daughters they didn't even have. Irrelevant. All right. So Tammy and Renee working on Reimagine Main Street. Our $2 million commitment to Black-owned small businesses is unique, and in its support for not just women who had businesses prior to the pandemic, but also those who were blessed and able to launch their businesses during COVID. Reimagine Main Street partnered with more than a dozen organizations in its national network to market and produce the Backing Black Business program. Now, notice how innocent the name sounds. This is the same thing I was talking about when it came to Kimberly Crenshaw's African American Policy Forum. They sound real official. They sound official. They sound fairly generic. They sound innocent. They sound like, they're altruistic. African American Policy Forum. You would never bet that something with that name would purposely downplay the experiences of boys and men to target women and girls at their expense, at boys and men's expense, by misrepresenting the numbers purposely. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I did a video on that. Check it out. But to go further, the Backing Black Business program doesn't say backing Black women's businesses, does it? It says Backing Black Business program. It's kind of like Black Lives Matter. You didn't have any idea that it had nothing to do with you until you as a Black male walked in the room and tried to apply or tried to support or try to establish a position and be handed a mop and a bucket. Or in this instance, be told that none of these programs do you qualify for because you have a penis. And because you had that penis as a Black male, you somehow didn't suffer from Jim Crow, redlining. I don't know. Anyway. So, Meta provided financial support through its Black-owned small business grants program. $2 million in cash grants will be reinvested back into main streets across America and bear fruit for many years to come. Now, here's the thing. I agree. $2 million isn't a lot of money. Now, it is in a poor community. It is amongst entrepreneurs that barely have a pot to piss in. But it's more an issue when you have a multitude of these programs operating on every level of governance. That's what I was saying before. City, state, region, national. And you have programs at every level, policies at every level being pressed for if they don't already exist. And I imagine that'll increase, especially as we start to see more Black women in high level positions. We're seeing the vice president, we're seeing, the new Supreme Court judge. I'm sure that these things will continue to develop. Let's see what else we have. Here's another one. SBA offers increased financial assistance to Black female business owners. Yeah. So there you go. If you don't fit that profile. See, when I started the show, you might have, I don't know if you even saw the title. Current Redefinition of Blackness is Gendered. The impact of priority female ascendant policy. That's what this is. This is the policy that creates a new buffer class that excludes Black men. Your access to this, to these doorways comes in your private relationships to women in this position. If you're family, married to, something of that nature, you may benefit in regard to that. I've told you how many brothers reached out to me to tell me even just to get PPP loans, they had to make women the face of their organizations. Back in 2020. It was amazing to me. But that's what the nature of it is right now. You have to have the benefits of these types of policies have to filter through her. See, it's much like welfare in the 50s and 60s. You couldn't benefit from it as a Black man. You could benefit from it as a Black boy, but only as it's filtered through mothers and grandmothers. You have to suck at the teat. But to stand on your own 2 feet, the point by which you become an adult, you don't have access to these things. And strangely enough, it becomes your failure that you're not able to do as easily without this support what your sisters can do. And if you do it, please don't be shocked at being told that you are in a very small minority, and that may make you feel great. But the reality is, it's not because you're great, it's because you slipped through the cracks. And I'm one who slipped through the cracks. I'm not wealthy by any means. I just slipped through the cracks. And that's why I can sit here and tell you that's all it was. It wasn't some Superman gesture where I got a degree and put a cape on and was able to fly above all of this shit that we go through. No, I just managed to slip through a crack. But don't get me wrong. I don't know of any Black males, successful or not, that don't know the 6 degrees of separation between them and utter poverty. I know the precise order of 2 or 3 things that could happen tomorrow that would have me on a street corner holding a sign. Real talk. I know it would need to happen. It's not so far from me that it's not a possibility, because that's all I've ever seen as Black men on the verge, or at least, as they say, 6 degrees away from it. Women-owned businesses, especially those owned by Black women, are increasing significantly in the U.S. today and have gained a foothold in the economy. However, they're still facing challenges, one of which is securing small business loans. However, the Biden administration is working to give female entrepreneurs the help they need. Last week, Small Business Administration, SBA, leader Isabella Casillas Guzman announced the availability of $1.5 million for 10 new grant opportunities for established minority-serving institutions aspiring to host a women's business center to provide local outcome-oriented business services to female entrepreneurs. Eligible applicants for the grants include HBCUs, minority-serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities, Native Hawaiian-serving institutions, and Alaska Native-serving institutions and nonprofit organizations. Our office looks forward to supporting initiatives to ensure that multicultural women and the academic institutions that support them across the nation have access to resources and support to advance entrepreneurial opportunities in preparation Natalie Madera Cofield, assistant administrator of the SBA, told Forbes. Women-owned businesses also face issues when it comes to seed funding to start a business, but have a better track record of success long-term than startups led by men. The Boston Consulting Group, and first of all, and I wonder why that is. Because whereas some men may have access to resources that others don't get, by no means is that all men. And traditionally speaking, Black men have never had that kind of consistent access. I'm not talking about individual Black men who may have had a relationship with somebody. I'm talking about Black men as a collective. I had a cousin who I remember back in, this was about 99. Wife and I she was my fiance at that point. We were living in Oakland. And I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I finished my master's. I'd taken a couple years off. I'd worked for this corporation that was doing some foul shit. So I organized a citywide strike. And then I left and moved to Oakland with my fiance. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And my cousin was deep off into real estate, and he was flipping houses. He was doing pretty well. Charles, appreciate that support. What's going on, man? He was doing really well. And I remember thinking, damn, I wonder how I can get into that. I don't know nothing about real estate, but I've heard nothing but good things. How do you get into it? What do I have to do? And I remember it actually took months before I can even get him on the phone. He was so busy. And when he ran it to me, he was like, well, I don't really have time to help you. There's so much going on, this, and that. I'm like, I understand. I get it. It is what it is. But then after another conversation with him, I found out what happened. He knew a wealthy white man that liked him enough to invest in his first property and advised him on how to manage it until he made enough money to pay the white man back and still had enough capital to get his foot in the game. And he continued to have advisement from this wealthy white man to help him work his way through. Now, there's no diss. It is what it is. I have a college degree. At some point, I had to, take classes from white men. It is what it is. But my point is, it wasn't something that was a product of genius. He didn't just wake up one day and figure out the secrets to real estate and become a mogul. See, that capital barrier, that keeps a lot of people out of a lot of different games. A lot. And the only thing working him through was an investment by a white man that found him appealing and likable. He was nice. Now, I'll say about him in particular, the brother's brilliant. He's always been brilliant. I'm not taking anything away from that. And I'm not taking anything from his accomplishments. But it did help to demystify some of the differences. This is now, in other words, what this white man did for him, you have whole families doing for their kids. But when you come out of Black America, there's no capital in that regard. So you don't get capital because you exist. Right? I've had 3 grandfathers die. One of them left me a $50 watch. There's no capital involved with Black death, statistically speaking. It is what it is. That being said, he was able to take what little he got and the advisement he got, and he built off of that. And shout out to him. But before you shoot yourself in the head with how you're not doing as well as others, don't trip. When it comes to Black folk and this whole issue of capital, 99% of the time, there's a story you just haven't been told about how certain people made it through cracks that you didn't. Now, I'll be very explicit. My crack was, the crack I got through was I got loans. That was it. I did get fellowships after I got into position, after I'd already taken the loans out to even get in a position to apply for a fellowship, but it is what it is. And that was because I knew somebody, but that's a whole nother story. The point is, this shit doesn't come generically. And when you don't come from families that have this wealth, you're riding on the good graces of others who are basing whether or not to support you on shit like, do you make them feel comfortable? Are you a nice guy? Their sons and daughters don't have to be fucking nice. They just exist. And that's what it is. It's, So these kind of programs that I'm talking about are really replacing a familial structure of wealth transfer that Black folk in particular don't have. And if you're going to create an arbitrary difference between two groups in the same impoverished community that only have 2% of the country's wealth, do you know what that does over a couple of generations if this holds consistent? You won't have to worry about a Black political bloc ever again. We're already reaching a saturation point where Black males and females, especially in Gen Z, have very different outlooks. Just saying. Mr. Anderson, appreciate that support. Let me see. What's up, Yvette? How are you? You know? So anyway, so let's continue. Right. Okay. Boston Consulting Group reports women-owned businesses who pitched ideas seeking early-stage capital received at least 1 million less than male business owners. Notice how they don't qualify that by race. This is what I mean by flat maleness. Excuse me one second. You wear aligners, they dry your mouth out. So forgive me. All right. But this is what I mean by flat maleness. When convenient, all males will be flattened into one category, as if there's no critical difference between white, Asian, Latino, and Black males and their access to familial wealth and inheritance. Like, that's not a difference. Under flat maleness, you can be a 1% white male from an elite family and a Black boy from the ghetto that managed to squeak your way into college. And as far as maleness is concerned, it's the same. So when you hear these kind of statements kind of randomly thrown out here in an article, you know, Boston Consulting Group reports women-owned businesses who pitched ideas seeking early-stage capital received at least 1 million less than male business owners. Which male business owners? However, the report added women-owned companies brought in more revenue in the long run, gaining 10% more in revenue over a 5-year period. According to Forbes, in 2019, 50% of businesses were operated by women of color. However, between 2014 and 2019, the average revenue for businesses led by women of color decreased by about $2,000. The average revenue for businesses led by non-minority women during that same time rose by more than $20,000. Hello. Now, what they're doing here in this piece is the same thing Black feminists have been talking about since the early 1980s, right? The argument is, and this is what led to interlocking systems of oppression and then intersectionality. The idea basically was that we are not white women and we're not Black men. In other words, we're different from both groups, right? White women have access to privilege and race, and therefore, because we're not white women, we don't see eye to eye with them. Black men are inherently oppressive and problematic and sexist, and so we can't really see eye to eye with them. And because we are distinct from both groups, we suffer more due to race, class, sex, and gender. That was the argument. Nobody paid attention to Sedanius when he actually analyzed that, and even Athena Matua, and looked at it empirically and said, well, that's not actually true. Black men actually suffer more because of their gender, not less. In a variety of contexts, not just when it comes to interactions with police or incarceration. It's not just limited to carceral issues. They suffer more. But anyway, that's the logic they're using in this report. So the first paragraph right here on the screen at the top, that one framed the difference between men. The second one frames the difference between non-minority women. There's white women. That's all I mean. And now notice, in order to make that argument, they didn't say that this had to do with males of color or Black males. They said male business owners. I would argue what these two paragraphs are basically saying is that Black women are not white men and they're not white women, and therefore they need assistance. But because they flatten those male categories, if you're talking about Black women, then part of you might want to somehow suggest that Black men fit in that category too, because again, they have access to resources and capital that somehow comes out of their penis. I'm still waiting for it to come out. So, anyway, the WBCs provide a range of business resources, including one-on-one counseling, training, networking, workshops, and mentoring to women. Since last March, 24 WBCs have opened, including 3 affiliated with HBCUs and 2 in Puerto Rico. Currently, the Office of Women's Business Ownership funds and supports the largest network of WBCs in the U.S. with 140 centers in 49 states. Y'all ain't hearing me. Y'all are really not hearing me. Shout out to Randall for the Cash App. Black Uru, appreciate the Cash App, brother. Roderick, Greg, Abe, Roderick again, and Crispus. Appreciate the Cash App support from all of you. Thank you. And I think I missed, Motown Hemi. Appreciate that support. Right. I really do appreciate the support, y'all, for real. If I haven't mentioned you, it's not by any means purposeful. But hear what I just read. Since last March, 24 WBCs have opened. 24 have opened. Right? Including 3 affiliated with HBCUs and 2 in Puerto Rico. Currently, the Office of Women's Business Ownership funds and supports the largest network of WBCs in the U.S. with 140 centers in 49 states. Tell me again how $1 million ain't nothing. It ain't about $1 million or $2 million. It's about how these types of structures and institutions are able to leverage resources and capital to distinct populations that provide eventually a class difference. Now, there's already a living quality of life difference between what Black men and women experience. When you factor that into structural programs like this that are funded by philanthropic sources like individuals or corporations or through federal sources, it provides a vastly different level of access. And the fallout of this, we won't see fully for at least another generation. But trust me when I tell you, if this holds consistent, you're looking at a split in the Black community that might be completely irreparable if that's not already occurred. This is the advent of a buffer class. Now, understand something. This might make a couple of Black women millionaires, but overall, what it's really going to do is going to create a shelf or a bit of a glass floor for a certain population of business-minded women with college degrees. They're relatively going to be fairly low on the income level, especially in relation to white women, but they're still going to have a standing. And more than anything, it's going to produce a different outlook, a different worldview about the quality of life. That's going to be something that the average Black male is not going to be able to provide parity for, not to the same degree. This is how that difference in worldview is manufactured and embellished upon, right? Because these are the same type of people in 20 years that are going to turn around and say, I built my business from scratch and I did it on my own. Watch me when I tell you. Don't nobody want to tell you how many of these businesses have been running the last few years on male supporters, family members, boyfriends, ex-boyfriends, husbands, ex-husbands, and what came out of the divorce. Nobody's going to talk about how many of the resources from men have actually carried these businesses. But then when you add in these policies, these same individuals are going to turn around in a little bit of time and tell you how they built this up by pulling themselves up with their own bootstraps. Watch it happen. Business Hour, appreciate that support. Right? Because Black men are the most marginalized group on the planet. Moreover, we are expected to be twice as good as everyone else. Real talk. David Price, appreciate that support. This is how the difference in worldview is exacerbated. We already had a difference coming out of the 50s and 60s. It was just far more subtle. But this has been manufactured over generations. This isn't new. This is just the latest addition to that difference. Last line of it reads, the application acceptance period will run through March 14th, 2022. Okay. SBA offers increased financial assistance to Black female business owners. Now let's look at one other piece. And this is on CNBC.com. U.S. unemployment rate falls in December, but rises for Black women. Hello. I don't know if y'all are listening. U.S. unemployment rate falls in December, but rises for Black women. Hold on. Trying to play with it for a little bit. All right. Anyway. Yeah. So again, CNBC.com. You can look this one up yourself. This came out January 7th of this year. Unemployment rate fell in December for all U.S. workers except Black women. The overall unemployment rate dipped to 3.9% last month from 4.2% in November, the Labor Department reported. But the Black women jobless number jumped from 6.2 to 4.9% and followed a roughly 2% drop in November. Right? And that was more than likely a product of a lot of the reporting we've been seeing about this, this pandemic and how it's affected women. And the only way they really reported that is by completely sidestepping how it affected very particular groups of men, like Black men. I've said this repeatedly. I will continue to say it because we lack perspective. Before going into the pandemic, when it applies to Black men, right, over 35 states, Black male unemployment was between 40 and 50%. Unprecedented before the pandemic. The pandemic hit. What, you think it got better? All of a sudden, I stopped seeing reports on homelessness. But again, leading up to the pandemic, half of America's homeless was Black. Nobody wants to talk about what percentage of that were men. Nobody. Every now and again, you'd see a report about a woman and her kids living in front of a McDonald's somewhere, but don't get it twisted. Across race, the majority of the homeless tends to be male. And when you factor in incarceration, right, and people who are being released from prison, even during COVID, even with housing vouchers, often no one would rent to them. So the homelessness rates have been ridiculous, as have the unemployment rates for Black men. But when you can talk about a she session or the pandemic and how it affects women, this category of women gets flattened, and the dismissal of men and the multiple categories under that moniker gets swept under the rug. And people wonder why men's frustration, Black men's frustration most particularly, is so high. It's not because it's an out of nowhere thing where men are just jealous and angry. It's because this is happening in the very communities we live in. And so many educated white collar women are oblivious to it. The only time it's apparent is when we talk about the dearth of dating options. Not dating options in its entirety, dating options from high level men. That's really where it comes in. And there's not enough high level men, but the reality is there never would be. I mean, even if there was equity in Black male and female income and employment, there still wouldn't be enough high level men. But then the question becomes, are there enough men of parity, men who could provide the same type of parity? It's not as high as it needs to be. A lot of that has to do with incarceration and the permanent and almost permanent, well, really permanent effects it has on, those who are formerly incarcerated. And when you wipe out college access or college degree access in prisons, it makes the problem that much worse. You leave in the 70s with a degree and at least be able to bounce back and have added incentive, right, to not be another statistic as far as recidivism is concerned. But no, you remove those programs, it becomes that much more difficult for people to reacclimate and support themselves. So the lower the percentage you have of Black men who are able to provide an experiential parity to Black women who are working and fairly well employed, the further the gap in how we understand things. And again, it becomes individual Black male failure and not collective structural policy. I'm trying to show you the policies, be they low level or large scale, because they all have impact. And they have impact on how we see each other and how we interact. Unemployment rate fell in December for all U.S. workers except Black women, while the headline hiring number came in much lower than expected in December. The overall unemployment rate dipped from 3.9 to 4.2 in November, the Labor Department reported. However, the unemployment rate for Black women jumped to 6.2 last month from 4.9, the only race and gender group whose unemployment rate worsened in December. All right. Now, Black, Hispanic, white workers. I want you guys to count how many times they reference Black men in this article. And what do I mean by that? I don't need every article about Black women to also be about Black men. But strangely, when we do see articles about black men, there's always an uproar about how black women are left out. But I'm saying in an article like this, I mean, look, if you were going to have an article about, Hispanic men's status with income, status with employment, it would at least be appropriate to get at least a sentence about Hispanic women because we're talking about a community. But let's see what we find. All right, the increase followed a roughly 2% point drop in November. At the time, some economists saw that decrease as a cautious sign of improvement for black women seeking jobs. The data for smaller demographic groups tend to be pretty volatile, said Elise Gould, senior economist for the Economy Policy Institute. We need to look at longer term trends to see what's happening. But the December rate for black women does represent an improvement since the start of last year when it stood at 8.5%. We're definitely seeing improvement in in the black unemployment rate over a longer period of time. Interesting. The black unemployment rate. They haven't even talked about black male unemployment, and those are very different things. What brings the whenever you hear black unemployment rate, usually the reason it's as low as it is because it's men and women mixed. If it was just men, it would be unforgivably high, and most people don't want to report those numbers. Anyway, the disparity in unemployment progress for black women speaks to the uneven labor force recovery throughout the COVID pandemic, according to Nicole Mason, president and CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. What the December numbers signal to me is that we are in for a bumpy, tumultuous ride ahead in terms of our recovery, especially for black women and women of color workers who have been disproportionately impacted over the course of the pandemic, Mason said. Yeah, that's the going line, disproportionately impacted. We're not going to talk about those who weren't employed, didn't have housing. We're not going to talk about them at all. We're going to talk about those who were employed in fairly low-level jobs. They were getting paid less than white women, and they were impacted because of the pandemic. But those who were struggling long before the pandemic are not even subject to discussion. Anyway, the unemployment rate for women overall was 3.6% in December, 2.6 percentage points lower than that of black women. 304 watching. Please like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you would. December's report also does not reflect the full effect of the current surge in COVID cases sparked by the Omicron variant, particularly as outbreaks derail school and daycare openings, Mason added. This came out in January. So we won't understand the impact of Omicron on job numbers or unemployment of women re-entering the workforce until January or February. For all black workers, the unemployment rate in December came in at 7.1%, more than twice that of white workers at 3.2%. The roughly 2-to-1 ratio for black versus white unemployment has been consistent throughout history, economists have found. And that number, again, is much higher when you just focus on black men. But anyway, discrimination and occupational segregation and all sorts of other related factors have meant that outcomes for black workers are worse in the labor market than that for white workers. That translates into historically a higher unemployment rate that's about 2 times that of white workers throughout the business cycle. And that is the end of the argument. End of the article. So how many times did you hear black men even referenced? Y'all tell me. They were subtly referred to whenever the word black was used. And this is, again, what I talk about in flat blackness, right? Our numbers are useful at key moments in time, but not necessarily us. The reason the unemployment rate is twice that of the white community is it really does come down to black male unemployment in many respects. But we're not going to talk about black males. So we'll talk about the collective numbers, which imply black male presence. But then we're mainly going to just focus on black female unemployment status and the extent to which, dealing with unemployment rate falling or rising for black women. Okay. But again, 35 cities, 40 to 50% unemployment for black males. I had to go to a great extent to tap dance around actually having to say anything about black males. But I didn't get to check the State of the Address or State of the Union today. So, I'll see if I missed something of significance. Maybe there was a statement about black males that slipped through the cracks. Y'all let me know. Yeah, this is what we're looking at. So I really just kind of wanted to put a number of things on the table, because I think the class and separating race, class, and gender, to me is asinine, because these things are so intricately connected. It's just that in the Black community, we've had conversations around class, or around race, around class, and around gender as it pertains to women and girls. We have not actually had a discussion about the intricacies of the Black male experience. Most of the time, what's referred to as Black male is usually generic for Black. That's what we had in the 70s, most especially. But dealing with the intricacies of the Black male experience, getting into the granular aspects of the statistics around important issues, we don't really talk about the difference in the quality of life. And I understand why. I mean, for one, it makes it difficult to actually create this buffer class experience if you're constantly focusing on the difference between Black men's and women's access. But the other problem is, you have those that, don't want to exacerbate the differences between the two, because it would disrupt how we see ourselves as a Black community. Now, there are some that argue that the Black community is dead. There are some that argue that, everybody should walk away from it. I'm not making any of those arguments. All I'm saying to you is that whether you want to repair it or not, you still got to start with what's really going on with Black males. Either way, you got to understand it. Because if you are a Black male, you're living with it. And you're living with Black males, you're living with it. So you do need to understand it, no matter how you feel about the Black community. But if you want to repair the Black community, and you've been taught to chivalrously dismiss Black men's experiences, whether you be a Black feminist or you be a Black man that just, has been taught to prioritize women and girls, neither way is going to work. The realities of Black male life require attention and focus. They require that one understands them at the very least. If you want to understand how this community falls apart or how it reintegrates itself, either way, it's going to require a deeper understanding of Black male life. That's what it comes down to. Kiel, he asks, is there any turning back after this? Again, it all depends on how willing we are to really grapple with the realities of Black male life. This is why when I did the last show I did, when I talked about the study, or really the meta study, dealing with intimate partner violence and how Black males were the demographic to most experience it across race and gender. How many people damn near cussed me out or tried to? My block game is quick though. So I didn't have to sit through much of it beyond removing people. But the reality of it, so many people were incensed by what I said and what I posted. And all I did was read from the actual paper itself. But so many were frustrated because it went against the narrative that they had grown up with. That abuse was strictly something that happened from men to women, and in the Black community, most particularly from Black men to Black women. Any denial of that or presentation of data that shows the reverse, or even just highlights Black men, was considered a heresy. And which is the appropriate word, because much of what we're seeing in this Black feminist gynocentric kind of press is religious in its orientation. It requires a religious logic, which is more fanatical than it is logical. It wasn't about people saying, let me read the study and see what it has to say. That's not what I got. I either got brothers that were surprised, brothers that didn't fully understand, or women that were incensed. Those were the three major categories of response to this data about, and understand, even though the study came out in 2012, it was assessing, over 88,000, I think at least over 86,000 people, majority of whom, anyway. So it was, examining a large population of people, but it was also referencing studies that had gone back 40 years. It was a meta study of multiple studies that went back decades to show that this wasn't a new phenomenon. So before you say, well, 2012 is an old study, technically it's older, but at the end of the day, it's covering data going back 40 years. So the implications of it is that it still exists. I mean, shit doesn't change in a decade that quickly, not when it comes to human behavior. So the nature of the study was more important than the age of the study because the nature of it was so deeply structured. And to get to Kiel's question about, is this repairable? It all depends on the willingness of people within the Black community itself, first and foremost, to actually come to the conclusion that what they think they understand about Black male life is nowhere near what it actually is. And you can misinterpret that living with Black males. There's just a lot of shit you don't know. To this day, my mother will never know how many police car hoods I've been thrown over simply for walking. She will never fully know how many times I've been threatened on the basis of just being a Black male. I mean, hell, I was watching Black Snake Moan the other night with Samuel Jackson. He said, man, you know how much trouble I've been in for just being Black and nearby? Real talk. My mother will never know. My sister will never know. 98% of it, I never told them. And the shit they found out about had nothing to do with my decision making. It was stuff that, it came to them in avenues I couldn't control. But my daily experience, they will never know. And the reason I didn't tell them was as chivalrous as it always is. I didn't want my mother to stress. I didn't want her to be concerned. I didn't realize that actually can have an adverse impact because it helps contribute to this narrative that Black life is all the same and gender only makes a difference as it applies to women and girls. We contribute to the narrative by not talking about the experiences. In fact, we're told that if you do talk about it, it's somewhat like it's akin to complaining, and complaining is feminine. And so you'll be disrespected because you're a man complaining, as opposed to just getting up and changing the world. Okay, whatever. Talking about it is the first step to changing it. You have to identify that there's something that needs to be changed, and you have to understand the nature of it. And as Blade said, once you understand the nature of a thing, then you know what it's capable of. If you don't understand the nature of the problem, you won't know what it's capable of, and you'll underestimate the full extent of its impact. And we are now decades, generations deep in a program that has thoroughly incentivized one demographic pulling away from the so-called community and solipsistically only looking at their own experience as representative of Blackness. And this is what I mean by the redefinition of Blackness in the current moment. It doesn't include Black men, except when our numbers are useful for an argument that pushes forward Black women and girls. See, people think I get into this because I have a hatred of women, or I'm angry, or some woman hurt me. A lot of women hurt me. That's irrelevant. I'm past that. I'm grown. I did my damage. I got my lumps. I gave my lumps. I hurt people. They hurt me. It is what it is. That doesn't motivate my work. What motivates my research is what can be empirically perceived. And the difference in the quality of life in ways that we can prove beyond a shadow of the doubt is my concern. And when I look at that, I see a Black male quality of life that is untenable and should be so disgusting to anybody that understands it, that we should be working tirelessly to get rid of it. Instead, people are comfortable with it, and shaming Black men is a part of it. And I can't tolerate it. And that's real. And that's why I want you guys to have as much data as possible. That's why I want you to have the links, the articles. I want you to have the papers. I want you to have the statistics. I'm just constantly pouring them out as they hit my desk. It's 5 minutes later that I'm putting them out there. I want you to have access to it because so many people believe that there is no difference in the Black male experience, that they'll gaslight you and treat you like you're crazy for even bringing it up. You damn near need to provide these statistics just to prove you didn't make them up. And then what you'll find interesting is people will still dismiss you. Oh, yeah. Strangely enough, I get a series of reports like every Thanksgiving and Christmas when brothers will tell me when they get with their families and have these debates. But when you're in female-heavy families, the debates tend to be very one-sided until brothers start using statistics and data to make the point that there is a difference in the quality of life between Black men and women. And you'll get two responses. Either you'll get a room of silence, or you'll get just a complete rejection of your argument altogether, but not with a response rooted in anything analytical, just a dismissal altogether. That tends to be the reports I get from Black men who talk about trying to have these discussions, but prior to having in any of this data or any of the things that we've been talking about, it was more a matter of being finger wagged and lectured to about how much more difficult Black female life was and how sexist Black males were. When you push back against that with data, silence or outright rejection tends to be the response. There's a select few that actually can say, when I had this discussion, my wife or my mother, my grandmother, my cousins, my aunts, they actually said, wow, I didn't know that. Very rarely. But then again, that goes back to how we're socialized. You're not supposed to listen to servants. They're beneath you. So you don't take them seriously. I'm joking and I'm not. So anyway, what's up, Edward? Jay Cleveland, what's going on? What's up, Christopher? It is what it is. And the Black men, what's up, man? Malika, good to see you. I forgot. Yes, I know I greeted you earlier, but glad to see you're still here. The brothers that actually begin to use this information to protect their sons, to advocate for black males, be they young or old. Hell, even some of the old cats will reach out to me. I've been invited. I've been invited on false pretenses to join a number of different groupings and organizations over the last 5 years, and sometimes it'll be a group. It could cover all kinds of shit. But what I end up finding out is that the reason I was invited under the table was to give this information to groups of older men that don't really listen to YouTube. And these are mostly older brothers that have lived through some of this, but they never had the pieces to put together. You know what I mean? And you'd probably be surprised how often, instead of pushback, I get responses that I never would have imagined from older men that said, damn, I thought it was just me. I thought it was just me. And when I started talking about intimate partner violence, intimate partner homicide, or sexual assault and rape, I had grown Black men in their 70s and 80s telling me stories they never even told their wife or kids about how they themselves experienced different types of victimization, and sexual victimization at that. At the hands of men when they were grown, at the hands of women across all ages. I mean, you'd be amazed at some of these stories that I was given to hold in confidence from men who'd never spoken a word of it in the 60, 70 years since it occurred. Never said a word. One brother wrote in my comment sections from a video earlier this week. He said, when I talked about intimate partner violence and the degree to which, Black men experience it from Black women, and higher numbers than any other demographic experience it from their women or anybody else. He said, my girlfriend, I think it was 40 years ago, stabbed me. You know what? I want to read it because I don't even want to mess it up. I was tearing up reading it. Because this stuff, but that's not the same thing as talking or even listening to men who've gone through it. Okay. So there's one where he tells what happened, and then there's another where I asked him what happened after that. Hold on. Because I was blown away. Man. Where'd it go? I screenshot so many of these. It's ridiculous. Because I get so many different stories, and on my phone I can't copy and paste them, so I'll just screenshot it, and I'm afraid my phone is just inundated with these various stories. But I think it's important to keep some kind of record, and when I do decide to publish again, I will include some of these things with respect to people's privacy and whatnot. But okay, wait. This is one of the difficulties. Anyway, all right. So I'll read the second part, but verbally, what he said was, in the first part, if I remember correctly, he said his girlfriend from 40 years ago had stabbed him because she felt like one of her girlfriends liked him. She stabbed him because she felt like one of her girlfriends liked him. And when I asked him what happened afterwards, he says, I was taken to a local hospital. I believe that the authorities at the emergency room called the police. What's funny is, at the time I was working with Raven, Rape and Violence In Now, a local men's group ending violence against women. I refused to press charges. I was sure that I would be arrested. Y'all don't hear me. You can go back to the last video I did. It's in the comment section. Shout out to Nim. Hope you're well, brother. Anyway, I appreciate you hanging with me tonight. Like I said, I didn't feel like I had much energy, but apparently I had some things I wanted to get off my chest, and I appreciate your patience, willingness to listen. With respect to Inner Light Radio, we've gone on for a minute, so I'm going to close it down here. If you're interested in more of a dialogue, you can send me a subject and or a request for, kind of an open panel, and I'll be willing to listen to that if you're so inclined. Ryan, appreciate that cash out. Randall, thank you. So other than that, thanks for joining me on this, and help me. I'm interested in the comment section. I'm interested in your thoughts, because I'm proposing this as a way of understanding it. The redefinition of blackness as Black female. The impact of priority female ascendant policy. Right? It's not just a couple of dollars here and there. I know some people thought that, especially when we were talking about programs for single mothers in the Black community, right? And it only take 500 or 600 women and only give them $200 a month. And of course, when you look at it from that vantage point, it looks like men are complaining over nothing. But as you can see, some of these pieces I read tonight, it's much more structured than that, right? Much more structured. Some of these programs are represented across over 50 states. Some of them are filtering down anything from federal to state level funding, even city level. And it has an implication when none of these programs allow for Black male participation. So I wish you brothers well. I wish the ladies that joined and were engaged in some quality discussion that wasn't about derailing the conversation simply because Black men are saying something uncomfortable. I applaud you ladies, and I wish you guys a good night, and I will holler at y'all later. So peace. I am here to tell you, brothers, we are not criminals by birth, perennial rapists, incapable intellects, man-children, sperm donors, child support wellsprings, success objects, walking phalluses, ATM machines, lottery tickets, unintelligent henchmen, valueless assassins, pro bono mercenaries, unpaid bodyguards, interchangeable stepfathers, child discipline proxies, unpaid repairmen, workhorses, emotional tampons, or any other socially accepted dehumanizing stereotype. We are thinkers, inventors, innovators, leaders, fathers, and men. Embrace your humanity, know your worth, and extend your time, attention, and resources only to those who genuinely respect you. And remember, your worth is not defined by meeting other people's narcissistic and selfish and unrealistic needs. You define your worth. Peace.